The 2023 film, The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer, is a historical fiction based around the life of a SS guard named Rudolf Höss, who was a commander at the Auschwitz concentration camp. The Zone of Interest is, of course, this euphemistic language that the Germans had for the area around the concentration camp. And it's just a series of pictures, a series of long shots, shots from far away, long scenes of duration that carry out for a long time, of the noise and the polyphony and the texture of German family life at that time. Children playing in the backyard, and husband and wife talking, or dealing with friends and social life and kids and discipline and school and learning, and just what it was like being upper middle class, successful German family at that time, living what in America we tend to call the American dream, living this idyllic life of upper middle class. It's what it means to make it in society. And to make it, of course, means to have the job, to have the family, to have the pet, the kids, to have the backyard, and the sense that of getting what's yours. And the book is just full of the mundane, the sounds and the silences and the minutia of just normal life, normal domesticity playing out, the rhythms of life happening. And that's basically the whole movie. But of course, the real center, the moral and thematic center of the movie, we understand, is what's not shown. The moral center, the source of the energy and the beauty and the brilliance of the movie is what's happening just off screen. Because off camera, of course, we know behind the wall is the Auschwitz concentration camp. It's never seen. But you hear gunshots in the background, right? You hear screams from behind the wall from time to time. And it's what's just outside the periphery, just outside the range of vision, in a way is ultimately the core of the story. Because it's a story about what's not seen. It's a story about how you could be so close to atrocity and unable to appreciate, unable to see the atrocity unfolding. What's apparent when we're thrust into this family life, we're thrust into the dynamics of parenthood and kids and relationships, is the way in which there's so much there. There's so much richness. There's so much to pay attention to. There's so much to focus on. There's so much to worry about that it fills up a life. It fills up all your attention. It sort of consumes all your attentional resources, right? It takes up your entire field of vision. The drama around kids and the drama around hosting and cooking and meals and comfort and trying to live the good life and trying to make the best, happiest, most loving, caring environment for your kids and family. That has a way of filling up the entire range of vision so that there's no room for anything else. There can be things happening that you have no more space for. You have no more ability, space to take on those other facts. And in this case, of course, we're talking about what's happening on the other side of the wall. When your life is so focused on your family and on your, what we'll call analogously, the American dream, making it in society, making it in your job, making it in your relationships and in your marriage, and just trying to be there, supporting your kids and your family in every way you can, there's nothing left. There's nothing left to give for questions, for asking difficult questions, for interrogating another person's experience, for inhabiting another person's reality, for being curious about what might be happening behind that wall, to ask questions of moral implication, to ask the kind of questions that can have a very destabilizing effect on your reality, on your understanding of reality, to ask questions that can undermine the solidity of the life you've built, that can undermine the relationships that you have, that can undermine your mythologies that you believe about your nation, about your war, um, about your patriotism. When all your love and attention is given to your family and to your people, what room is there? What space is there to give love and attention to an outsider? When all your empathy and your mourning and your concern are on the Nazi war dead, on the Nazi war cause, on the Nazi story of German history and German identity and German patriotism, what room is there to listen to another story? What room is there to hear another story, to humanize a person that doesn't fit into that story? Of course, the answer is there is none, right? And that's obvious. That's how human beings are. And that's what this movie explores. And it explores that from the sense of proximity, of being so close and so far. You're on it's just over the wall, but it couldn't be farther away. It's not invisible because it's not invisible despite being close, it's invisible because it's so close. Because your life is so intrinsically tied up with that other side of the wall, and not understanding, not knowing, not peering, not being curious about the other side of that wall. Another documentary I saw recently is the 2020 documentary Final Account, which is just interviews with this sort of last generation of elderly Nazis. Interviews with these men and women, some of them are in nursing homes at this point, who were involved in this Nazi project, who were the Nazi guards, the soldiers, or just bystanders, Nazi party members, and interviewing them about their experience. And there's many different sort of stories and perspectives that emerge from that documentary. And all of it is worthwhile and necessary. There's one scene I remember very vividly. It takes place in a nursing home. And there's a bunch of these sweet, elderly German grandmothers sitting around talking about their memories, sharing their memories. And one woman says to the camera, and she's visibly emotional, she says, "I can't speak for the others, but I knew nothing." And there's a deep sincerity in her voice. And of course, she's getting at the heart of this question. How could this happen? And the answer is, we didn't know, right? That's the answer. We didn't know. And another woman sitting around in the group points at her and says to her, "You didn't know because you didn't want to know." And that, of course, is the essence of the zone of interest. It's the essence of this question. It's this essence of this question of proximity, that fence, that wall that exists that you don't know because you've never looked over that wall. You chose to never look over that wall. You couldn't. You didn't have the courage, or you didn't have, or you had the wisdom, you could say. You had the wisdom not to look over that wall. You didn't know because you couldn't know. You couldn't handle that knowledge. And so you just didn't know. And human beings can always not know. We can always choose to be ignorant. It's an incredible capacity. And seeing in action just sort of always continues to amaze me. But we can always not know. One of my favorite quotes is from the book They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer. And Milton Mayer is a journalist who went to Germany after World War II, and he went to get to know and befriend the Nazis and understand what happened in Germany. And so he has many conversations with these former Nazis. And so often these former Nazis, they tell their side of the story. They justify their experience, what they did. And so one such conversation from the book is one of Milton Mayer's friends. He says, quote, "You know, Herr Professor, we are told that not a sparrow falls without God's care. I am not being light when I say this, that not a person fell ill or in need, lost his job or his house without the parties caring," right? The party, of course, is the Nazi party. "No organization had ever done this before in Germany, maybe nowhere else. Believe me, such an organization is irresistible to men. No one in Germany was alone in his troubles." And then our author, Milton Mayer, interjects, "Except," I said, "inferior races and opponents of the regime." Of course, he said, that is understandable, but they were few. They were outside society, over the fence, and nobody thought about them, right? And that's always the way it is. That's always the way it is. That's the zone of interest. It's the euphemism. It's the ability to not see, to not look, to not be curious, to be so inwardly focused, to worry about your own, to worry about your family, and to worry about your people, and to be so obsessed with that narrative of redemption, that narrative of uh, cultural and political national resurgence and identity and solidarity and patriotism. There's no room for anything else. There's no space left for anything else. And that means you never look over the fence. You never know what's happening just over the fence. Louis Theroux, who is a documentarian that I really admire. I watched his documentaries in college quite a while ago now, and they had a big impact on me. He did all sorts of beautiful documentaries at the time. He recently came out with a new documentary, The Settlers, and it's about these religious settlers in Israel, often of American extraction, although not always, living in the West Bank. And at one point, Louis Theroux was talking to this more elderly, older, grandmother-like Jewish Israeli settler. And he has a dialogue with her, which I've transcribed here. So Louis Theroux says to her, they're standing on a hill in Judea, Samaria, overlooking the beautiful Judean hills, a vista that I've enjoyed with my own eyes many times, a beautiful, beautiful landscape. And they're having a conversation over this beautiful vista. And he says to her, why are you trying to expel the Arabs? Why not have a one-state or a two-state solution, right? Why not share the land or just have two parallel states? Why expel, right? So she says, we want a Jewish state. She says, we're different people. We can't be neighbors. That's what this settler woman says, right? So Louis Theroux says, I just wonder if you're aware that they're really suffering. And there have been settlers rampaging through the area of the West Bank. He continues, when people are invaded and put under military occupation, right, which is what happened to the Palestinian people, he says, when people are invaded and put under military occupation, anger seems to be an understandable and appropriate response. The woman responds, there's no such thing as settler violence. Louis Theroux is shocked, right? This is an amazing moment. This is the zone of interest moment where someone is right there. Someone is right on the forefront, and she is so ignorant. And you might say a casual viewer might assume she's lying, but she's not really lying. I know she's not lying. I know she's not lying because I know people like that. I have them in my immediate family. I stayed by their houses. I've spoken to them many times. I was once like that too. You know, I've been on both sides of this debate, right? She's not joking. She's really not joking. She says there's no such thing as settler violence. Louis Theroux says there are videos, you can see them, right? That's the zone of interest moment where your proximity and your narrative makes you so blind and just boggles the mind of someone like Louis Theroux, like an external observer. How could she be so ignorant? And the answer is she can't. It's possible. It's still possible to be ignorant if you want to be ignorant. If you can't look over that wall, if you can't be honest, because it would touch on something foundational, it would shatter some very important ideological commitments, then you can remain ignorant, and you will remain ignorant. And it's incredible to see. And then she further articulates her ignorance. She further articulates this perspective, which again, I once also believed. I know so many people who believe it, right? She says as follows. We don't wake up in the morning and think about violence. Why would we? Our life is good, right? It's such a telling truthful line, right? Her life is good. Life is good for her, living in an affluent military superpower. She's upper middle class. She's living the good life. She's living what we would call in America the American dream, right? But Louis Theroux says the reason there's violence is because you want the settlers to leave. You said that. And Louis Theroux is so flabbergasted at this point. The woman says, what is on my mind all the time is how to bring more people to settle the land. And at this point, she's basically on the verge of tears. She says, I don't think about the Palestinian town of Beitar. I think about, I am a Jew. I'm a human being. Louis Theroux says, yes, you are, and so are they. The woman says, I don't think about this. And again, the zone of interest, right? You can only see your own humanity, and you're so filled up with that story and that narrative and that concern and consideration, that sphere of orbit, that you don't see the humanity of the other people. You don't humanize the other people. It's exactly what the zone of interest is about. It's exactly what it's about, to a T. Louis Theroux says, it would be understandable to think about your own children or your own people first, but to think about other children not at all, that seems sociopathic, doesn't it? And she responds, not at all. This is normal. The normal thing for me is to pray for my own people, right? And that's the world I grew up in. And that's the world I know very well. And that's a very human thing. She's right, ultimately. It is normal, in a way, tragically. It's normal in the zone of interest. It's normal in that this is why atrocities happen. And this is why atrocities are normal. I spent a lot of time in the zone of interest when I was younger, and I have wonderful memories. I can think of it fondly. I have lots of memories from that time period. And when you're in the zone of interest, I could tell you from personal experience, you don't see other human beings beyond that wall. The Palestinians that I saw did not have any humanity to me. They were just like what Shaul Magid says in his book, and when we spoke together on this channel, they were just like the flora and the fauna of the land. There was no thought to their perspective, to what they were going through, to their history, to their narrative. And there just can't be, because that's the zone of interest. That's that wall of ignorance, which in that zone you can never penetrate. I now appreciate how that dynamic of not being able to see the humanity of these people, of seeing people as if they're the flora and the fauna, like Shaul Magid says, I now see how that is the core, that is the spiritual core of all atrocity, of all genocide, of all human cruelty. At the time, you don't see that. At the time, it just feels normal. At the time, that just feels like, you understand the situation better than anyone. But when you have that distance, when you leave the zone of interest and you're able to look over that fence, you see how inherently vile and destructive that dehumanization practice is, that dehumanization perspective is. And so, in short, complicity is normal. Shutting out the screams, ignoring the screams, this is normal. Oppression couched in the language of just fighting for our way of life, fighting for our survival. It's us versus them. We have no choice. Trying to bring on the Messiah. God gave us this land. It's all very normal, historically speaking. It's all very human. Religious fundamentalism is normal. Trying to conquer, expel, Lebensraum, this is all very, very normal. And regular people, you don't have to be evil, you don't have to be a monster. Regular people are capable of engaging in these things when they're trying to protect what's theirs. They're trying to protect their American dream, their way of life, their narratives, their sense of righteousness. Yeah, it's all perfectly normal. And I think a lot about the fact that it costs me nothing to speak out. It costs me nothing to observe and to see what I see and to report on what's obvious to me. It costs me nothing. But what if it did? What if it cost me? What if it would cost me my livelihood, my community? What if it would cost me all my most valuable relationships? What if it would cost me my sense of righteousness, the sense that my cause is just? What if it would cost me those things? What would I do? I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to judge people. The Fall by Albert Camus is a short novel narrated from the perspective of this Judge Clements, who's sitting in a bar and he's talking to you, the reader, and he's sort of just narrating his life and his experience. And he tells the story of feeling very confident in his righteousness, as being a judge who protected the widow and the orphan, someone who's really committed to social justice. But he had a trauma in his life. He experienced a very unsettling event. He was walking on a bridge one evening, and he saw a woman standing at the edge of the bridge, and it was late at night, and the woman jumped from the bridge, committing suicide. and he felt he had the opportunity to save her, to rescue her, and he didn't. And he just walked away. And this, of course, weighs on him. It haunts him. And it sort of shattered his sense of righteousness. And so he now is sitting in this bar in a very sort of undermined, regressed kind of state. And he's talking to you, the reader, about this whole experience. The story, of course, doesn't have to be a metaphor for anything. And it could be a metaphor for many things. But if we want to make a metaphorical reading of the story, Albert Camus gives us some material to work with. The novel is set in post-war Amsterdam. And he says, quote, "I live in the Jewish quarter, or what was called so until our Hitlerian brethren made room. What a cleanup. 75,000 Jews deported or assassinated. That is a real vacuum cleaning." So basically, this is a book written in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Albert Camus lived through the German occupation. And there's hints here that we're talking about sort of the guilt that comes with living through atrocity and feeling like you didn't necessarily know what was going on. Feeling like you didn't necessarily know what was happening on the other side of that fence. Feeling like you may have had the power to do more, and you didn't. You just sort of kept on walking. You didn't follow up on that plunge that you heard on a bridge in the middle of the night. The fall ends with the following reflection from our judge, Clement. Quote, "You yourself utter the words that for years have never ceased echoing through my nights, and that I shall at last say through your mouth. O young woman, throw yourself into the water again, so that I may a second time have the chance of saving us both." Right? He says, please, if only I could go back in time. If only I can go have a second chance. I would have a second chance of saving us both. I could save the young woman who I neglected to save the first time, and I could save myself, because I've been ruined living with the guilt of not having done anything, of not having stood up for justice. And then he says, he could have ended the book there. He could have ended the reflection there, but he doesn't. He continues, "A second time, eh? What a risky suggestion. Just suppose, cher maître, that we should be taken literally. We'd have to go through with it. Brr, the water's so cold. But let's not worry. It's too late now. It will always be too late, fortunately." End quote. And it's such a powerful reflection, right? On the fact that there's an instinct to want to try again, but there's also an awareness that the water is so cold. We would have to go through with it. And we don't want to go through with it. We don't want to give up what we have. We don't want to give up our mythologies and our stories. The stories that exclude the other, that dehumanize the other, that fail to see the other person's experience.